Welcome to Mind of Stoic. I'm genuinely glad you're here, because today's conversation might just change the way you see yourself, and the way others see you. Here's the truth. Truly intelligent men carry a secret. It's not about having all the answers or being able to list the capital of every country. No, their real strength lies in something far quieter and far more powerful, knowing when to keep their mouth shut. Sometimes, what you choose not to say speaks louder than any clever remark ever could. I've spent years observing people through the wisdom of ancient Stoic philosophy, and, admittedly, through countless cups of coffee, while watching human nature unfold in real time. And let me tell you this, the wisest men I've met all share one thing in common. They don't waste words, they don't rush to fill silence, and they certainly don't say things that chip away at their credibility. Why today we're diving into 7 things intelligent men never say, not because they're flawless, but because they've learned them sometimes the hard way that certain phrases lead nowhere good. So stick around, hit that subscribe button, and let's grow wiser together. The first phrase. I already know that it slips out of our mouths more often than we'd like to admit. On the surface, it sounds confident, maybe even harmless, but underneath, it reveals something far less impressive. A closed mind, and an intelligent man knows better. Because the moment we convince ourselves there's nothing left to learn, we shut the door on growth. I learned this lesson painfully. Years ago, I worked with a mentor, a man who carried himself with the calm certainty of someone who had weathered countless storms and spoke only when necessary. We were reviewing a process I had done hundreds of times before. He began explaining a detail, and without thinking, I cut him off. Yeah, I know that already. He didn't argue. He just looked at me calm, steady, but with a weight that landed harder than any lecture, and moved on. It wasn't until later that night that the truth sank in. I hadn't just interrupted him. I had robbed myself of an opportunity to see what he saw, something invisible to me with my limited experience. His decades of wisdom weren't written in manuals or explained in training videos. They were earned, and I had brushed them aside with 4 careless words. When we say, I already know that, what we're really saying is, I have nothing left to learn. That's not intelligence. That's arrogance dressed up as competence. Stoic philosophy slices right through this illusion. Marcus Aurelius warned us clearly. You cannot learn anything if you believe you already know everything. The ego, the constant urge to appear knowledgeable, to defend the image we've built, becomes the very thing that blocks our growth. It convinces us we're standing on solid ground, when in reality, we're just balancing on pride. Intelligent men understand that knowledge is not a trophy to be won and placed on a shelf. It's a river always flowing, always changing. Step into it twice, and the water is never the same. I once watched a master carpenter listen quietly to a young apprentice explain a technique he had probably mastered decades earlier. He nodded, asked questions, even thanked the apprentice for sharing. Later, I asked him why he hadn't just said, I already know that. He smiled and replied, because sometimes you learn more by seeing how someone else sees it. That, right there, is wisdom. It's a kind of intelligence that doesn't need to announce itself. So the next time you catch yourself thinking, I've heard this before, pause, listen anyway, not to humor the other person, but because you just might catch a detail you missed before, a nuance that shifts your perspective, or a new angle that deepens your understanding. And even if you don't, you've practiced humility. You've shown respect. Over time, that makes you the kind of person others want to listen to. The phrase is, that's impossible. Several years ago, I worked alongside a man named Robert. He was sharp, seasoned, and carried himself with the kind of authority that made people trust his leadership. He seemed to bear the weight of the entire company on his shoulders, and yet he rarely showed any strain. But there was one habit, one reflex, that revealed his hidden weakness. Anytime a new idea surfaced, whether it was entering a new market, streamlining an outdated system, or approaching a difficult client, Robert would shut it down instantly with 2 words. That's impossible. At first, it almost sounded responsible, maybe even practical. After all, who wants to waste time chasing pipe dreams? But as the months passed, a sobering truth became obvious. Every time he said that's impossible, it wasn't the idea he was really describing. It was himself. His own limits. His own fear. The Stoics understood this kind of self-sabotage well. Seneca once wrote, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. And that was exactly what Robert was doing. Projecting his own fear of failure onto the situation, fear of the unknown, fear of being wrong. Fear of trying and coming up short. It's a quiet fear, the kind that disguises itself. It wears the mask of logic, caution, and practicality. But underneath, it's the very thing that keeps us small. The belief that if we can't see the entire path, we shouldn't even take the first step. Stoic philosophy slices through this illusion. It reminds us that the obstacle itself isn't the true problem, it's our perception of the obstacle that defeats us. I witnessed this lesson firsthand years later, on a project that seemed destined to fail. The budget was painfully tight, the timeline almost laughable, and the team inexperienced. Every logical part of me wanted to say, this can't be done. But instead of declaring defeat, I asked myself one simple question. What can I control today? Then another, what's the very next step I can take? Day by day, step by step, we moved forward. And to my surprise, that project became one of the most successful I had ever been part of. Not because we worked miracles, but because we refused to be paralyzed by the size of the challenge. We focused on the next small move, then the next. Marcus Aurelius put it clearly, you have power over your mind, not outside events. That became the turning point. When a man says, that's impossible, he's waving the white flag before the fight even begins. Intelligent men know better. They understand that what feels impossible is often just unfamiliar. It's not a wall, it's an invitation to grow stronger. True strength isn't built by winning every battle, it's forged by showing up again and again, especially when the odds are stacked high. That's not reckless optimism. That's disciplined persistence. Life constantly places difficult tasks in front of us. The moment we label them impossible, we slam the door shut on our own potential. But the man who dares to take one step forward, no matter how small, opens doors that others don't even notice. And that is wisdom born from effort. Which brings us to the third phrase. Perhaps the most subtle, yet deeply damaging of them all. That's not my fault. I remember when a friend of mine, Michael, lost a major client. His reaction was immediate. He explained that the client was too demanding, the market was shifting, and his team had missed deadlines. All of these points were true to some extent, but while he was busy pointing out why he wasn't to blame, something far more important slipped away: the chance to learn from the experience and get better. Instead of growing, he stayed stuck, repeating the same mistakes, convinced the problem always belonged to someone else. What Michael didn't realize was that by refusing to claim even a fraction of responsibility, he gave up the one thing that could have changed everything: control over himself. The Stoics were clear on this. They believed we should focus on what is within our control and release the rest. Epictetus said it plainly, it is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. That is the key. When we say, that's not my fault, we hand over our power. We wait for someone else to fix the situation, to make amends, to change. But when we accept even a small share of responsibility, we reclaim control. We shift from passive to active, from powerless to powerful. I've seen this in my own life many times. Owning my part, no matter how small, has opened doors I never noticed before. Sometimes it was as simple as admitting I hadn't communicated clearly, or that I could have prepared more carefully. Even when others made bigger mistakes, the willingness to accept responsibility shifted something inside me. It built trust with myself and with those around me. It showed that I wasn't waiting to be rescued or vindicated. I was ready to act. Blame is easy. Responsibility is hard. But it's also where true strength lives. The Stoics remind us that life is not about avoiding difficulty, but about rising above it. And rising begins with a simple but powerful question. What can I do differently next time? That is how intelligent men lead. Not by pointing fingers, but by finding a way forward. Abraham Lincoln famously visited General McClellan, despite their sharp disagreements. Seeking insight and strategy, he also spent countless hours with his cabinet, famously referred to as his team of rivals. Why? Because he valued their perspectives, even when those perspectives clashed with his own. That wasn't weakness. That was strength, measured by humility. And that is a lesson intelligent men eventually learn. Self-reliance matters, but it was never meant to be absolute. The Stoics made this point clear. Marcus Aurelius, perhaps the most powerful man of his era, wrote openly in Meditations about the debts he owed to others, his mentors, his teachers, his friends. He catalogued the lessons he had learned from each of them, acknowledging how their wisdom shaped his own. Imagine that. The most powerful emperor in the world didn't pretend to have all the answers. So why should we? Yet many of us fall into the trap of believing that asking for help is admitting defeat, that reaching out means we failed to be strong enough. But this belief is an illusion, one that keeps us locked inside our own heads, slowly drowning in problems we were never meant to face alone. Even worse, when we refuse to ask for help, we rob others of the chance to give. We cut off the mutual support that ties people together. I've fallen into that trap myself. There was a period in my life when I tried to carry everything at once: work, family, the endless pressure of trying to live up to an image of strength. I thought that keeping it together meant keeping it all to myself, but the truth, it only wore me down. The turning point came the day I finally admitted to someone I trusted that I couldn't do it alone. What I found wasn't judgment. It was understanding, support, relief. That single moment of humility gave me the clarity and energy I had been missing for years. True strength isn't measured by how long you can stand alone. It's measured by knowing when to reach out a hand and when to take one. The Stoics remind us that we are part of something larger, designed for cooperation and mutual aid. Epictetus taught us that no man is an island, and, when we pretend otherwise, we fight against the very nature of life itself. Strength isn't diminished by asking for help. In fact, it's defined by it. Because to ask requires courage. It requires honesty. And those qualities are the true marks of intelligence and wisdom. Carrying burdens alone isn't noble, it's unnecessary. So the next time you feel the urge to say, "I've got this, I don't need anyone," pause. Ask yourself, is that really strength speaking, or is it pride, dressed in disguise? And remember Lincoln, who led with wisdom and humility, knowing that even the strongest men need others beside them to truly stand tall. Take Harry Bernstein's story. At 93 years old, after a lifetime spent working as a magazine editor and raising a family, he decided to write his very first book. He called it The Invisible Wall, a memoir of his childhood in a poor English town divided by religion and prejudice. Publishers turned it down again and again. But Harry didn't give up. At age 96, his book was finally released. It touched lives all around the world, translated into multiple languages. He went on to write 3 more books after that. What struck me most about Harry wasn't just the success, it was the courage. The courage to believe that life still had more for him. That even in his 90s, he wasn't done growing, learning, or contributing. And that courage isn't reserved for extraordinary men like Harry. It's a choice we all face, sometimes every single day. Do we listen to that voice whispering that our chance has passed? Or do we embrace the truth that as long as we have breath, we still have purpose? The Stoics understood this well. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly that death is inevitable. Yes, but until it comes, our duty is to live as fully and as virtuously as we can. Age, they believed, means nothing to the soul. Wisdom often comes with age, not simply because of years lived, but because those who remain curious and courageous deepen their understanding as time passes. Growth doesn't stop with age. I've seen men in their 60s learn new trades, launch businesses, and mentor the next generation of leaders. I've also seen others allow regret and the weight of passing time to convince them to retreat from life too soon. The difference isn't circumstance, it's mindset. A man who says, "I'm too old for that," has already closed the door. But a man who asks, "What can I do now?" opens it wide again. Age doesn't disqualify us from living boldly. In fact, it gives us more to offer: experience, clarity, resilience. These aren't signs that we're finished. They are the very tools of someone who is just getting started. And that, at its core, is the Stoic path. To keep learning, to keep striving, to keep contributing until the very last moment. Because as long as we are here, there is still work to be done. If Harry's story resonates with you, give this video a like and don't forget to subscribe to Mind of Stoic. Every time I uncover a new perspective on life, I want you to be the first to hear it. Because the truth is simple: tomorrow isn't guaranteed. That's why men of wisdom act today. They pick up the phone and make the call they've been putting off. They take that first uncomfortable step toward repairing a broken relationship. They begin the project that's been gathering dust in the back of their mind, the one haunted by hesitation and self-doubt. They do these things not because they are easy, but because they know that waiting for the perfect moment is a dangerous gamble that almost never pays off. I've seen this in my own life. There were conversations I avoided because I feared the discomfort they might bring. Letters I never wrote because I assumed there would always be more time. But when I finally stopped postponing and acted, something shifted. The heaviness I had carried for so long began to lift. Clarity replaced regret. And I realized an essential truth. It's not intention that builds a meaningful life, it's action. The Stoics taught us to live now, with urgency, with purpose, with awareness that later is nothing more than a comforting illusion. Later lulls us into waiting, until it's too late. But the man who acts today, who refuses to leave the important things undone, is the man who lives without regret. That is true wisdom. Because opportunity doesn't always knock twice. More often, it fades quietly while we're busy waiting for a better time. True wisdom is not about rejecting who you are today, but about respecting yourself enough not to stay the same tomorrow. Growth is not born out of self-hatred, but out of self-respect. Each day is a chance to practice, to make a small commitment to becoming a slightly better version of yourself. Not perfect, not finished, just better. When a man says, "That's just how I am," he isn't speaking truth, he's choosing to stop. He's closing the door on possibility. But the Stoics remind us of something deeper. Life is change, nature is change. To resist it is to deny the very essence of being alive. The man who understands this doesn't fear change, he welcomes it. He sees himself as a work in progress, unfinished yet willing. And in that willingness lies true wisdom. And if you've ever caught yourself saying one of these 7 phrases, "No, this you are not alone." I've been there more times than I'd like to admit. But here's the good news. Intelligent men aren't those who never stumble. They're the ones who notice when they do, and then choose to do better. That's the journey we're on together here at Mind of Stoic, becoming wiser, stronger, and more grounded, one thoughtful choice at a time. So, which of these phrases struck a chord with you today? Was it the quiet trap of, "I'll do it later," before later becomes never? Or the heavy resignation of, "I'm too old for that"? Maybe it's time to leave behind, "That's just how I am," once and for all. Whatever it is, take this as your invitation to take the next step forward. Because wisdom has never been about being flawless. It's about staying curious, staying humble, and always choosing growth. If today's conversation resonated with you, share it with someone walking the same path. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Mind of Stoic, because the journey doesn't end here. I'll see you in the next video.